Okay, let's dive right into a stack of sources that pull us deep into, well, a really twisty psychological thriller narrative.
hmm
At its heart is this compelling, really unsettling mystery. A woman vanishes again, 2 decades after her first kidnapping.
Yeah,
And someone who seems completely unrelated starts feeling this bizarre, undeniable connection to that original traumatic event.
that's precisely our mission today. This deep dive uses excerpts from an audiobook transcript as our source material.
Right.
And what's fascinating about these sources, they give us this really intimate first-person perspective. We're essentially inside the mind of the narrator as she navigates this confusing, disturbing link to a very public missing person case.
So we're sort of following her journey.
Exactly. Our goal is to extract the critical information, piece together the clues, and follow the challenging path of memory and investigation she embarks on.
And right from the start, we need our narrator, Fern. She's dealing with, well, it sounds like a significant amount of personal anxiety. But there's this persistent, growing feeling that she somehow knows Astred Sullivan, the woman who's just disappeared for the second time.
And the sources describe Fern's psychological state really vividly, right? You get a sense of the internal chaos.
Yeah, her therapist, Dr. Lockwood, offers some potent metaphors. One is her thoughts being like a marble shooting through an endlessly curving slide.
Like this unstoppable descent.
Exactly, accelerating. And another is like a needle stuck on a record, just replaying the same tiny bit of a song over and over.
Right, Dr. Lockwood frames this as her anxiety, telling her she has to fixate on this one thing, but calls it a lie, suggesting she can train herself to move the needle.
But Fern feels it physically, doesn't she? Like wires buzzing with electricity.
Yeah, it immediately establishes her as someone struggling with their own mind. It makes you, the listener, question what's real and what's anxiety right from the get-go.
So who is this Astrid Sullivan figure? The sources paint her as someone pretty well known.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A figure of public notoriety. Kidnapped at just 14.
14!
Wow. Yeah, held for nearly a month and then just returned. Found on the side of the road near her home, blindfolded, drugged.
That must have been huge news.
Massive. It catapulted her into the public consciousness. Her picture's been everywhere. The sources say everyone knows her.
And the tragic twist is, it's happening again.
Unbelievable, isn't it? The narrative opens with her second disappearance, described as the same things happening all over again. More than a week missing. No real leads, exactly like before.
So this forces everyone, including Fern, to revisit that original trauma from 20 years ago.
Precisely. And this is where Astrid's memoir comes in. It's called Behind the Red Door.
Right, and Fern finds herself drawn to it, maybe because of that weird feeling of connection or just, the general buzz around the case.
Could be both. And on the inside cover, there's this one sentence that just hits her, like a physical jolt.
The sources describe it as that jerking sensation her therapist said she couldn't actually feel, but she definitely does.
And this sentence is the first major breadcrumb, really. It says, Astrid writes about details and memories previously undisclosed, including the startling revelation that there was a witness to what happened, a young girl who never came forward.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah. And this detail instantly grabs Fern. It resonates so deeply with her unease, her nightmares, this feeling she was somehow there.
It triggers that phrase in her head.
Girls who see, girls disappear, girls who never speak up. It's almost like a mantra.
So this is where she starts thinking, maybe it's not just anxiety.
Exactly. Maybe it's more than just seeing the news. Maybe it's a real buried memory trying to break through.
She tries talking about this with her partner, Eric, right?
She does. He's portrayed as supportive, calls her bird, tries to keep her grounded, but his first reaction kind of highlights the challenge she's up against.
How so?
Well, he suggests her feelings are just a reaction to Astrid's picture being everywhere. He brings up the distance Astrid lived almost 50 miles away.
And asks if Fern's ever even been to Foster, Astrid's hometown.
Right, and Fern can't say for sure. Eric reminds her the official story was no witnesses to the original kidnapping. That was the whole problem. Nobody saw the abductor bring Astrid back either.
He basically says you have no memory of that story.
Yeah, he uses the therapist term spiraling. And this interaction is crucial because it shows that first hurdle. How do you convince someone, even someone close, that this vague, awful feeling might be a real suppressed memory? Especially when everything points to you not being there.
It sets up this huge internal conflict for her, trusting her gut versus, rational doubt.
Absolutely. And this whole struggle, real memory versus anxiety, seems deeply tied to her past, particularly her parents, Ted and Mara.
Oh yeah. The sources describe a really unconventional upbringing. Disturbing, actually.
That's putting it mildly. Ted, especially. He didn't seem to see Fern as a child to nurture, more like a subject.
Treated her like a research subject, it says. You feel her ache for Ted's attention, but he just gives these gestures of dismissal.
His work, his academic rivalries, his obsession with other people's success, that seemed to be everything. Not much room left for, being a dad.
And the sources give these specific, horrifying examples of how that played out.
Right. Like the time Ted and Mara left her alone overnight as a young child.
He promised they'd be back in an hour. Then nothing. No note, which she realized later was weird for them.
And as it gets dark, she's terrified, thinking about collisions, murders, explosions, shooting sinkholes, choking on chicken bones, all those childhood fears amplified.
She stood vigil by the window, then wrapped myself in an Afghan and crouched under the coffee table, doing this desperate, magical thinking.
Believing that calling the police would somehow doom her parents, like she was responsible for their safety, it's completely backward.
Just gut-wrenching to imagine, but the reveal the next morning is even worse.
Isn't it? They finally show up, and the truth is, they were outside Fern watching you the whole night.
It wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. An experiment.
And when she asks why, Ted's answer is just chillingly cold. An experiment is never forever. I always reveal what I've been doing. I do that for you, Fern, because I value your participation in my work.
Framing cruelty as a contribution to his work. Prioritizing his curiosity over her safety, her trust.
Yeah.
Everything.
It's a complete inversion of parenting. And you can see how this would mess with her sense of reality, her trust in herself.
And it wasn't just that one time, was it? There was the incident in the woods.
Oh, God, yeah. He takes her into the woods, a place she's already scared of, specifically to tell her this terrifying story. A hungry couple, a pregnant wife, a husband with a blade.
Why? Just to scare her.
As an experiment. To trigger fear. He actually wanted to interview her while the fear was still fresh.
That's monstrous.
Her reaction is described so vividly. She dropped to the mossy ground, closed my eyes, and covered my ears, screaming, just trying to block it out.
And Ted's reaction?
Dismissive. That was an experiment, Fern. Now, come on, let's get back to the house so I can interview you while the fear is still fresh. Her terror was just dated to him.
It's really hard to wrap your head around. Parents just totally absorbed in their own worlds, Ted in his office, Mara in her art studio.
Right. Mara's described as detached, finding broken pottery more compelling, maybe, than her own daughter. Her eyes glittering as she absorbed the brokenness.
And they contrast this sharply with Astrid's parents, the Sullivans.
Yeah, the exact opposite of mine. Ted and Mara were distracted, the Sullivans were hyper-focused. It just highlights the extreme neglect Fern experienced, made her world feel so unstable.
So this whole background, the neglect, the weird experiments, it's a crucial context for understanding her anxiety now and why her memories are so fragmented.
Absolutely. It explains why she struggles to trust her own mind. So as she tries to figure out this Astrid connection, she starts reaching out, trying to find some external proof.
She calls Kyla, her childhood best friend, asks about that summer 20 years ago, Edgewood Lake, near Astrid's town.
Yeah, she asks point blank, do you remember meeting Astred Sullivan?
And Kyla's just confused, right? Like, where the hexagon is this coming from?
Pretty much. Kyla doesn't remember meeting Astrid, but she does remember Fern having nightmares that summer.
So still no confirmation. Kyla's supportive, but can't give Fern that solid memory she needs.
Leaves Fern feeling even more isolated, relying on this gut feeling that feels shaky even to her.
She also goes to the local diner, talks to a guy named Rusty.
Right, and Rusty stocks Astrid's memoir, Behind the Red Door. He actually confirms the detail about the witness, Lily.
And mentions she never came forward.
Yeah, so this tells Fern the Lily filler is real, at least in Astrid's public story. It reinforces that detail's importance, but also raises the stakes. Why didn't she come forward?
So she's got these pieces. Her feeling, the book detail, Kyla remembering nightmares, Rusty confirming Lily is known. What's next?
She feels she needs more. She gets a meeting with Rita, Astrid Sullivan's publicist.
Okay, that's getting closer to the source.
Definitely. And Rita confirms, yes, Lily was the girl with Astrid in the basement, according to the memoir.
Does Rita offer any theories?
She does, and they're pretty chilling. She wonders aloud, if Lily was alive, why didn't she or her parents go to the police back then?
Implying maybe she didn't survive? Or something stopped her?
Exactly. Rita also shares details about the abductor from the book The Welder's Mask, the waiter's rubber gloves.
In that key detail, Astrid saw some feature that made him seem human.
Right. Rita speculates the abductor was probably young and adds this really terrifying thought, if Lily did come forward now.
The abductor might come for her next.
Yeah. suggesting the danger is still very real, even 20 years later.
Wow. Okay, so this meeting makes Fern even more convinced that she is Lily and the danger is real.
It solidifies it for her. And she feels she has to go to the police now, despite knowing they might be skeptical.
So she goes to Chief Dixon at the Ridgeway Police Department.
And she just comes right out with it. I'm Lily, the girl who was kept with Astrid in the basement 20 years ago.
How does Dixon react?
Predictably, unfortunately. Deeply skeptical. He says she's certainly been getting around, like she's just another person obsessed with the case.
Does he say others have claimed to be Lily?
He does. Do you have any idea how many young women have come in here claiming to be Lily? It really highlights how hard it is for a real witness to cut through that noise.
But Dixon does confirm something important, right, about her father.
Yes, this is critical. He confirms Ted did file a report 20 years ago after Fern came home distressed.
And the report mentioned her talking about a basement with a red-haired girl.
Exactly, Astrid. But Ted dismissed it at the time, and the police accepted his explanation, said Fern had dissociative amnesia, or it was just a nightmare because she was catatonic and couldn't give details.
So her own father basically undermined her story from the start.
And Dixon uses that now. He points out that the detail Fern offers the welder's mask is public knowledge now, thanks to the memoir.
Implying she could have just read it in the book.
Right. He basically tells her she's not offering anything unique, dismisses her, tells her to stay out of my investigation.
So another dead end, officially. And her trauma was just brushed aside back then.
Completely. It shows how the official story got set in stone and how easily her experience was invalidated.
There's also that detail about Father Murphy being at the station.
Yeah, Fern notices him there, talking to Chief Dixon. It's subtle, but it plants a seed. Why is he there? What's his connection to Dixon, to the case? It brings another local figure into the mix.
Interesting. So, with the police being unhelpful, where does Fern's mind go?
Her focus starts shifting towards a potential suspect, Brennan Llewellyn.
The pop psychologist Ted hates.
Viciously hates, yeah. And there are several connections that make Fern suspicious. First, Brennan was actually in foster around the time of the original kidnapping.
Ted mentioned he stayed with them.
Stayed with us those 2 insufferable weeks, Ted said. So he was geographically close.
And his work.
His books are all about fear, trauma, child abduction titles like The Terror of Isolation. It mirrors the themes of the case almost perfectly.
Okay, that's unsettlingly relevant.
Plus, his recent behavior seems suspicious. His agent says he's suddenly unavailable, demanded to delay his book tour right when Astrid disappears again.
That timing seems suspect.
And then Ted's pure hatred for the guy.
Yeah.
Calling Brennan a sellout, a fraud, getting physically worked up, fists shaking and his face getting all red.
So Fern starts thinking, maybe Brennan did it for research.
Given her own father's experiments, it makes a horrible kind of sense to her. Could someone else be that obsessed with their work that they'd kidnap people for material?
It shows how her own trauma shapes how she sees potential motives, even the most extreme ones.
Absolutely. It's a warped perspective, but understandable given what she lived through.
All this suspicion, these fragmented memories, it leads to a confrontation with Ted, doesn't it?
Yes, a critical one. Back at his house. She needs answers. Asks him directly. Was I missing 20 years ago when Astrid was?
And he finally admits it.
He does. Confirms yes, she was missing for about a week. Yes, she came back talking about a basement with a red-haired girl. Yes, she was catatonic, experiencing dissociative amnesia, memory repression.
Okay, so confirmation. But that's not the biggest shock, is it?
Not even close. The truly shocking part is why he didn't fully cooperate with the police back then.
What was his reason?
He claims the police were ineffectual, but then reveals his true monstrous motive. Front state, her memory loss, presented a marvelous opportunity for his research.
No.
Yes. He says, without your memories, whatever had happened to you was useless to my work. He prioritized studying her trauma response over helping her or finding the person responsible.
He studied his own daughter's catatonia after a kidnapping.
He did, only stopping when Mara pointed out it was making Fern worse.
I have no words for that. It's beyond belief.
It shows a complete lack of empathy, total self-absorption. His child's trauma was just interesting data.
And then he reveals the truth about the current situation, the Florida move.
Right. He admits he lied about moving. The whole thing was a setup. So you'd agree to come home.
Why? What was the goal this time?
To study her reactions to Astrid's new disappearance. He hoped it would trigger her repressed memories from 20 years ago.
So he could write about it.
Exactly. For a book. A project to blow Brennan right out of the water. It's all about his rivalry, his ego.
Using his daughter's trauma, again, for his own gain.
He even justifies it with his twisted philosophy. Knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied to my work. Anything is justified if it serves his work. It's textbook narcissistic abuse.
And Mara, where was she in all this? She shows up during this confrontation.
She does. And immediately reveals she knew about the current experiment. Says to Ted, "Your experiment worked," telling her you were moving.
So she was in on the manipulation.
Fully complicit. And she admits she knew about the original kidnapping too. Says, "I never loved that, and I made it very difficult to love Ted," but she didn't stop him.
Why not? What's her justification?
Disturbingly, she claims she respected Ted's work, didn't want to interfere because a person's work is their life. Fern, it's who they are.
Respecting his work over her daughter's safety after a kidnapping.
It's unbelievable. She then tries to frame her silence afterward as protecting Fern, making Ted keep quiet about the kidnapping to prevent more trauma.
But that's not protection, that's burying the truth, enabling him.
Precisely. It prioritized avoiding the issue over seeking justice or healing. She deferred to Ted's experiment then, and chose silence later. A profound betrayal.
So during this confrontation, Ted tries to push Fern to remember a specific detail.
Yeah, it gets really intense. He brings up Astrid's description from the memoir, how Lily screamed when the abductor's glove snagged, revealing a feature on his arm.
And Ted thinks she saw his arm, his psoriasis.
He does. He even pulls down his own glove, trying to trigger that memory.
But that's not what she remembers, is it? This is the breakthrough moment.
It is. She realizes the memory isn't of Ted's skin. Her recent anxiety, scratching her own wrist, seeing Ted scratch his psoriasis, it created a false link, a red herring in her own mind.
So what was the feature?
A tattoo. A specific tattoo.
Not on Ted.
No. She suddenly connects it to Cooper Kelly, Kyla's brother.
How does she remember that?
She remembers seeing it on Cooper's arm during that other traumatic incident when Ted dragged her into the woods for that fear experiment years ago.
Wow. So the memory was real but misplaced, tied to Cooper and to the fear Ted inflicted in the woods.
Exactly. The fear of being dragged by Ted got tangled up with seeing Cooper's tattoo. Ted's current actions just inadvertently unlocked the real memory trigger. It wasn't his skin, it was Cooper's tattoo, linked to that separate trauma.
Okay, so the tattoo points to Cooper. This changes everything.
It unlocks the final piece about the original kidnapping. Fern confronts Ted directly, using this new clarity.
And he confesses. He admits he kidnapped Astrid.
He does, just says, "Yes, I did. Of course it was me." With this shocking lack of remorse.
And his motive was Brennan.
Yes. Pure rage at Brennan Llewellyn. Wanted to see Brennan lose his sham of an empire. He kidnapped Astrid near Brennan's event, planning to frame him.
And Fern, finding her there was just collateral research?
An unplanned, marvelous opportunity, as he puts it. He admits he returned to Astrid after just a couple of days, specifically so he could focus solely on studying Fern's reaction. The memory loss, the catatonia.
He tries to downplay it, right? Saying she wasn't in real danger.
Yeah, you were never in real danger. I wasn't going to kill you. Still framing abduction and psychological torture as just his experiment. His moral compass is completely gone, warped by his work.
So now Fern knows the whole horrifying truth about her father. She must be convinced he has Astrid again now.
Absolutely. Despite Ted denying it, he has her, I point to Ted. She says, "I will never believe him again."
Yeah.
She frantically searches his house, but Astrid isn't there.
So where does she go? The tattoo memory. Cooper.
She races to Cooper Kelly's cabin. It connects the tattoo, the woods incident, the kidnapping implicitly. It's the logical place in her mind now.
She sees his truck isn't there, but goes anyway.
Driven by desperation, shouting Astrid's name as she approaches.
And she finds Astrid inside.
She does, forcing her way in. But it's not what you might expect. Astrid isn't being held captive.
What do you mean?
She's there, but she's with Rita, the publicist, and Father Murphy.
Father Murphy and Rita, together at Cooper's cabin.
Yeah, it's a major twist. Totally subverts the simple captive narrative.
So what's going on? Does Astrid confirm Fern is Lily?
She does, right away.
Yeah.
And crucially confirms the tattoo detail. She saw the same thing Fern saw, validating Fern's memory and linking Cooper.
But then Astrid says something about Father Murphy.
Yes, another shocker. She points to him and says he is the reason she walked away that day. He's why she was taken in the first place.
Whoa. So Father Murphy wasn't just some guy at the police station. He was involved from the very beginning.
Directly implicated by Astrid. It suggests his role is much deeper, much darker.
So why are they all hiding there together at Cooper's cabin, of all places?
Reed explains. They're afraid. They think the abductor, presumably Cooper, given the tattoo and location, will target Fern now that she remembers.
Rita actually says he'd probably come for her next.
Right. And they also want to avoid the media circus. But the implication is Astrid is hiding with them. choosing to protect Rita and Father Murphy despite Murphy's role in her past trauma.
That seems incredibly complicated. Why protect him?
It suggests maybe trauma bonding or desperate need for some kind of safety, even if it's with compromised people, or maybe something else entirely. It's complex.
There's also that detail about the memoir, about Lily not speaking.
Yeah, a really poignant detail. Astrid saying Lily never spoke a word was literal. Fern was so traumatized she became selectively mute in the basement, swallowed my own voice.
And Astrid invented the marble game.
As a kid herself, yes. To give Fern a constant I could count on, something to focus on, shows this incredible bond formed in that horrific situation.
So Fern finally has the full picture. Her parents' abuse, Ted's crime, Cooper's likely role, Murphy's involvement. How does she react?
With a profound shift. She sees Ted and Mara clearly, now Ted the narcissist, Mara the enabler, who prioritized his research over taking the most basic step to help his daughter.
She confronts them directly.
She does. Calls out the abuse for what it was. You dragged me up the stairs by my hair. You tied me up with ropes. That wasn't an experiment. It was abuse. It's her reclaiming her narrative, refusing their justifications.
And then, at the cabin, does she confront Astrid and Rita too?
Yes. She challenges them for hiding, for protecting Father Murphy, and implicitly Cooper asks, how can you want me to lie? How could you even take such a risk?
She argues for justice, not concealment.
Exactly. Questions why they'd risk everything to protect people involved in the crime.
It really lays bare all these tangled motivations, Ted's narcissism and rivalry.
Mara's enabling, maybe out of fear, maybe complicity, disguised as fucking work.
Astrid's complex survival instinct, protecting others perhaps as a coping mechanism, even those involved in her trauma.
Rita's protection motive, shielding Lily Fern, Astrid, Murphy, maybe controlling the narrative. Father Murphy, his role deeply implicated, but the specifics still a bit murky.
And Cooper. The tattoo points strongly to him as the original abductor, the man Ted tried to frame, hiding out now. But his exact current relationship with the others at the cabin isn't fully detailed in the sources.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, a lot of questions still hang in the air based on these sources. Is Cooper definitely the guy? What exactly did Father Murphy do? What happens next for all of them? Legal consequences.
It's intense. And bringing this back to you, the listener, this exploration really hammers home how complex memory and trauma are.
Absolutely. How the mind hides things to protect itself. How fragments resurface decades later, triggered in unexpected ways.
And how understanding that past, however painful, is often the only way to make sense of the present.
It also shines such a stark light on narcissistic abuse, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How one person's warped needs can just devastate lives, generationally sometimes.
The story isn't just about the crime itself. It's about rebuilding identity, the power of buried memory.
And the horrifying cost. When someone values their ego, their work, above basic humanity, above love and safety.
Yeah. It really leaves you thinking about the stories we tell ourselves, or the stories forced onto us and how they shape everything.
And the incredible courage it takes to face a truth that could tear your world apart, even after so much time has passed.
Or, as you said, who do we choose to protect? And what's the price of that protection?
A really challenging question this narrative forces us to consider.
It truly is. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into such a chilling, complex story.
It was fascinating to unpack, definitely. Always a pleasure.